Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world that often measures fulfillment by the presence of another at our side. We are told that wholeness comes only when we are coupled, that happiness is incomplete without a partner to define it. Yet beneath this cultural story lies a deeper truth, one that emerges when we dare to walk the path of solitude. Today, I invite you to see singleness not as a state of absence, but as a profound presence, a sacred stage of growth where the self is revealed in its truest form. To say that singleness is presence, not absence, is to reframe one of the most misunderstood states of human existence. Too often, society views being single as a deficiency, as though something essential is missing, as though a person alone is incomplete. But this way of seeing is born of illusion. Singleness is not the hollow echo of something lost, but the fullness of being with oneself in the most unfiltered, unadorned way possible. It is the rediscovery of presence, presence with your own thoughts, presence with your own rhythms, presence with your own soul. When one is single, the silence around them is not empty but charged with potential. It is a silence that listens. It is the kind of quiet that allows forgotten voices within to be heard, voices that were silenced by the noise of external demands, the expectations of relationships, the endless negotiations of living for another. In solitude, those whispers return, and in them, you begin to notice the contours of who you truly are. There is no absence here, there is only a deeper form of presence. Presence is not merely physical. It is psychological, spiritual, and existential. To be single is to reclaim your own time, to inhabit your own space without compromise, to explore the boundaries of your being without interference. It is to be fully rooted in the now, not as half of a whole, but as a being complete unto itself. Every moment spent in singleness is an opportunity to be with the inner world more intimately, to observe its shifts, its shadows, and its light. The illusion of absence arises because people have been conditioned to believe that their value is tied to their attachment to another. Stories, traditions, and even modern narratives tell us that we must search for our other half. But if you are half, then you have accepted incompleteness as your starting point. Presence, on the other hand, insists that you are already whole, already carrying within you the richness that life has given. Being single is not a void waiting to be filled, but a field already abundant, waiting to be cultivated. When you are single, you experience a freedom that cannot be found elsewhere. There is freedom in choosing your direction without seeking validation. There is freedom in shaping your day according to your inner desires. There is freedom in following the subtle impulses of creativity, discovery, and growth. This freedom is not the absence of connection. It is the presence of authentic choice. It allows you to align with what is true to you rather than molding yourself into what another expects. To sit with oneself in singleness is to encounter the mystery of selfhood. You begin to see the layers of identity, the masks you have worn, the desires you have inherited from others rather than chosen for yourself. The longer you remain in that space, the more those masks fall away, leaving you with the raw, unpolished truth of who you are beneath the layers. That revelation is not born of absence. It is the deepest form of presence imaginable. Singleness can be a mirror. It reflects back not only your strengths, but also your wounds, your longings, and your shadows. Many resist it for this reason, fearing the confrontation that arises when nothing distracts them from themselves. Yet within that confrontation lies transformation. What may at first feel like loneliness reveals itself to be an initiation into authenticity. It is in being present with yourself, completely, honestly, and without escape, that true growth takes place. This presence also opens doors to a wider relationship with life itself. Without the constant tether of another's expectations, you notice the world differently. You see beauty in the small details, you listen more deeply to the movements of your own heart, and you sense the threads of meaning woven through your experiences. Life ceases to be a backdrop for a relationship and becomes, in itself, a partner that speaks in symbols, moments, and synchronicities. Singleness is therefore not a condition of lack, but of fullness. It is the presence of possibility, of freedom, of truth. It is the encounter with the self in its most intimate form. It is the realization that absence is only a projection of the mind, while presence is the reality of the soul. To step into solitude is to enter a sacred space where the noise of the world fades and the truth of the self begins to emerge. It is not an escape from life, but a descent into its very depths. When one is alone, stripped of distractions and the constant pull of external voices, what is hidden within rises slowly to the surface. Solitude is not a barren landscape, but a mirror, and in its quiet reflection, the self is revealed in ways that cannot be glimpsed in the crowded corridors of daily existence. The self is a vast and layered entity, often concealed beneath roles, responsibilities, and expectations. We are children, friends, lovers, workers, and dreamers, all masks that shift depending on the stage we stand upon. Yet behind these masks lies the essence of who we are, an essence often forgotten as we lose ourselves in the performance of life. Solitude removes the stage, takes away the audience, and leaves us face to face with the raw being that exists beyond labels. In this encounter, we begin to perceive the truth of our identity. There is an intensity to solitude that cannot be softened by distractions. It forces us to notice the things we might otherwise run from: the shadows, the fears, the unresolved fragments of our past. Left unchecked, these hidden parts of the psyche drift silently beneath the surface, influencing our choices without our awareness. In solitude, however, they step forward. They demand to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be integrated. What initially feels uncomfortable or even painful is, in reality, the unveiling of dimensions of the self that seek healing. Solitude does not only reveal shadows, it also brings forth light. In the absence of constant noise, the sparks of creativity, intuition, and inner wisdom begin to glow. The imagination awakens, free to wander without judgment. Dreams take on new significance, and ideas rise like spring water from the depths of the unconscious. Solitude is the soil in which the seeds of originality and vision grow, nurtured by stillness and silence. To encounter oneself in solitude is to discover that the inner world is as vast and vibrant as the outer one. This revelation is not immediate. It comes slowly, like dawn breaking across a horizon. At first, solitude may feel empty, even unsettling. The human heart craves connection, and the sudden absence of familiar voices can be disorienting. But if one remains present within the stillness, the emptiness begins to transform into fullness. The silence that once seemed oppressive becomes a space of listening. Within it, the self begins to speak, not in words, but in sensations, insights, and subtle recognitions. In solitude, one learns to distinguish between the authentic voice of the self and the echoes of others. We carry within us the imprints of countless influences: family, culture, relationships, and traditions. These influences shape us, but they also obscure the unique rhythm of our own being. Alone, without their immediate presence, we can begin to untangle what is truly ours from what has merely been inherited. This process is not easy, but it is essential if one is to live authentically. Solitude is also a test of resilience. It asks us to confront the fear of aloneness, the fear that without others to define us, we will vanish into insignificance. Yet, paradoxically, it is only in facing this fear that we come to know our true significance. The self revealed in solitude is not fragile or dependent, but enduring and whole. It is the self that has existed long before any role or relationship, the self that remains when all else falls away. To embrace solitude is to enter into a dialogue with the eternal within us. It reveals the hidden architecture of our being, showing us both the shadows that limit us and the light that carries us forward. It is the crucible in which identity is clarified, where illusions fall apart and authenticity emerges. In solitude, the self ceases to be a stranger and becomes at last a companion. There are moments in life when we enter stages that are not ordinary passages of time but profound thresholds. These stages are not marked by external achievement or social recognition, but by the quiet and often unseen transformations of the inner world. To call such a time A sacred stage of growth is to acknowledge that it carries with it a deeper significance, a spiritual weight, as though life itself has paused to carve new patterns within the soul. Growth is not always visible. It does not always take the form of success, progress, or forward motion as the world defines it. Often, it takes place in silence, in solitude, in the hidden chambers of the heart where the old structures of self begin to dissolve. A sacred stage of growth is a season in which one is invited to shed illusions, to let go of false identities, and to allow the deeper truths of being to emerge. It is sacred because it is not chosen in the same way one chooses a career or a goal. It arrives unbidden, like a calling, asking us to surrender to its process. During such a stage, the familiar often begins to fall apart. What once provided comfort may suddenly feel empty. Roles we once identified with lose their meaning. Relationships may shift, and desires that once burned brightly may fade. On the surface, it can appear as though we are losing everything, as though life has stripped us bare. Yet beneath this dismantling lies the quiet work of renewal. The sacred stage is not about loss, but about preparation, a clearing of space so that something truer may take root. In this space, growth is not linear but cyclical, like the changing of seasons. There are times of darkness, when nothing seems to move, when confusion and uncertainty overshadow the path. Yet these periods are as vital as the times of clarity and light, for it is in the darkness that the soul germinates, just as a seed breaks open beneath the soil before it can push upward toward the sun. The sacred stage of growth honors both the light and the dark, both the joy of discovery and the pain of release. What makes this stage sacred is not only its inner work, but also its demand for presence. It requires us to slow down, to listen, to become attuned to the subtle movements within. It asks us to trust in a process that cannot be rushed, to surrender control and allow growth to unfold according to its own rhythm. In a world that glorifies speed and constant achievement, entering such a stage can feel countercultural, even uncomfortable. Yet it is precisely this slowing down, this turning inward, that opens the way to deeper transformation. The sacred stage of growth also carries with it a sense of initiation. Like ancient rites of passage, it strips away what is no longer needed and tests the resilience of the spirit. Loneliness, uncertainty, and struggle often accompany it, not as punishments, but as thresholds we must cross to encounter a more authentic self. Each trial becomes a symbolic gate, and each step through these gates brings us closer to an identity not bound by superficial definitions, but rooted in truth. This stage is also sacred because it connects us to the universal patterns of existence. Every human being, in some form, passes through such thresholds, moments where the old falls away and the new is not yet fully formed. These stages echo the rhythms of nature, the death of autumn, the stillness of winter, the rebirth of spring, and the fullness of summer. To recognize one's own growth as sacred is to align oneself with these timeless cycles, to see personal transformation as part of the great movement of life itself. In these times, solitude becomes both a teacher and a sanctuary. Without the constant pull of external validation, we learn to draw strength from within. We discover resilience not as the ability to resist change, but as the courage to yield to it. We begin to sense that growth is not something we create, but something we allow, something that moves through us when we open ourselves to it. To be in a sacred stage of growth is to live in a liminal space, standing between what was and what is yet to come. It is a place of uncertainty, yet also of profound potential. In the stillness of this threshold, we are shaped not by the demands of the world, but by the quiet hand of transformation that works beneath the surface of our awareness. It is here, in this sacred unfolding, that the self is refined, deepened, and prepared for the next horizon of life. To be single is not to be lacking, but to be free. Free to listen to the whispers of the soul, free to cultivate independence, free to uncover the wholeness that has always lived within. Singleness is not a pause in life's journey, but a journey in itself, a season where we learn that happiness is not given to us by another, but discovered in our own being. And when we stand rooted in that truth, we carry into every future connection not need, but strength,